I'm Leah Small, and this is Virginia Voices, where you will hear first-person stories from people most affected by current politics, policy, and economic trends. We give Virginians outside the news a full stage to explore their thoughts and experiences beyond a few sound bites or paragraphs in a daily news story. Virginia Voices is a project of the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO.
I am an Arab American. I am an Arab American because I tend the fig tree as earnestly as the dogwood and the pine. Because cinnamon and anise, cumin and cardamom inhabit my shelves and senses. Because I bake both baklawa and blueberry pie for my family. Because poems by Mahmoud Darwish and Lucille Clifton are my daily bread. Because both Ibn Khaldun and Howard Zinn explain the world to me. Because I'm awed by the blueness of the Atlantic Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea.
Those words are an excerpt from the poem I Am an Arab American by Zeina Azzam, a Palestinian American who is poet laureate of Alexandria. Zeina writes longingly about her ancestral home in Palestine while celebrating her American identity, often peppering her English poetry with Arabic. Zeina, who is 68 years old, came to the U.S. at the age of 10 after living in Homs in Syria and Beirut. Her parents fled their home in Haifa in 1948 when Zionist paramilitary forces violently drove more than 750,000 Palestinians from their homes to establish the Israeli state. The Zionists were European Jews who themselves suffered through centuries of displacement, antisemitism, and genocide. This mass displacement and dispossession of Palestinians is called Nakba, or the Catastrophe, and ignited a refugee crisis that's lasted decades. Today, Israeli settlements continue to displace Palestinians in the West Bank. This history has fueled both Israel and Hamas to conduct violent strikes in retaliation. Zeina's colorful and happy home in Alexandria is decorated with cultural emblems from the Arab world, fig trees and jasmine plants. She shared stories about her life as a child of refugees in America, Nakba and the Israeli-Hamas war, and her hope for the future. She also shared banana bread and more poetry with us, and a few stanzas from Zeina's poems will take us through her story. Next month, we will speak to an Israeli in Virginia impacted by the terrorist attacks by Hamas in last October. Zeina spoke with us independently, not as poet laureate.
I guess to begin, we should start with your parents' story. They were refugees. Can you put that in a place and time and tell me what you know about them fleeing?
Yes, my parents are both Palestinians from Nazareth in historic Palestine, and they grew up there. And my family, on both sides, my families trace back their ancestry for hundreds of years in Palestine, in Nazareth, actually. They were married in the mid-40s and moved to Haifa, which is a coastal city. And they had my oldest brother in 46. My father was working in shipping. He was working in the Mediterranean. And in 1948, there was the war when Israel was established. The Palestinians call that war the Nakba, or the Catastrophe, because it was when about 800,000 Palestinians fled from their homes because of the war, and they were never able to go back. And this included my own nuclear family and also my entire extended family. So my parents became refugees in 1948. They were lucky in that they didn't end up in refugee camps. They ended up going to stay with some relatives in Syria. They left everything behind and they had to start all over again from nothing. So my father had to find work, and we were Ours is not a unique story, but it's my family story.
Did they ever talk to you? And I know it's got to be hard to share this with your kids about the dangers they faced fleeing and some of the things they saw.
They did. They didn't talk a lot about it. They both, and I think this is the case for many refugees, especially of their generation. They wanted not to dwell on it. I mean, they lived it, and in the middle of it, they were frightened and they were insecure, and they didn't know what was going to be happening in the future. But I think they just didn't want to push it too much on us. Although, when we pressed them, they would tell us some things. I know right before they fled, they saw their neighbor in a pool of blood on the street, and they were living on a ground floor apartment. And they were telling me stories about how they were holding my brother, who was 2, and they were at the back door, and they were saying, if the militias come to get us in the front door, we'll go out the back, and then if we see them in the back, we'll go out the front. I mean, they were literally fleeing for their lives.
How did their experience impact how they raised you, their parenting, how you lived?
I was always so amazed, and I didn't really realize it as a child, of course, but I look back and I cannot believe how much my parents just were steadfast in moving forward. They were going to take care of us. They were going to make money and make our lives, facilitate our lives. It's just so easy, I think, to lapse into a depression or, feel like the world is against me and I can't do anything. But both of them just kept going forward. When we moved to the United States, I was 10 years old. And that's the thing is, like, my parents started a new life in Syria in 1948. And then they moved to Lebanon, where my father found a job. And they started a whole new life there. And then we came here to the US as immigrants, and we started again a whole new life. It's just, when I think back at what my parents had to do, it's really quite stupefying. It was hard when we moved here. We really didn't have anything. My father didn't have work. My mother started working outside the home for the first time in my life, and I was only 10. So it was a really tough time. Financially and psychologically. In my way of thinking, it's like my life is kind of bifurcated, before we came to the States and after we came to the States. These are like two very distinct pieces of my life trajectory.
And where did you guys settle when you first came here?
We moved to upstate New York, a town called Delmar, which is a suburb of Albany. And then we moved to Albany, New York. So that's where we were. That's where I had my teen years until I went to college. In New York, no sea to swallow the sun each day. Foods were sweet in America. People spoke as fast as they walked. Everything was large. Washing machines, supermarkets, even bananas and red grapes. We settled in this vast, cold place with neither boots nor a sense of how to be warm. Snowfalls were beautiful and cruel. The freezing air slapped our faces each morning.
Did you face any prejudice or any other issues settling in?
So back when I was 10, that was in the late 60s, and we didn't have the kind of, diversity that we have now. I mean, I think we had it. People were not sensitized to the importance of diversity and the respect and dignity that you afford, other communities. So we were very much different. Very few Arabs, Arab Americans, and certainly very few Palestinians were living in our area. So yes, we did face some discrimination. People, I mean, I remember this. People would say to me, "Oh, you're Palestinian. Where's your gun?" And
Wow.
so there were lots of discriminatory kinds of comments that people would make toward us. I mean, at the same time, you always find people who are kind and who are good people and who, you make friends. So despite that kind of treatment that some people would give us, there were other people who were good, nice, and kind. By the fall of 73, when there was a war with Israel, that's when I went to college. Actually, that was my first year in college. And I was the only Arab on campus. And so I felt very beleaguered. I look at a lot of Arab and Palestinian students these days on campuses, and they have a community. They grow together politically. They talk. They have a lot in common, or at least some ways to be in solidarity with each other. But at that time, I had nobody. I didn't have a political awakening with other, people, young people my age. It was a very different time. It was a very different time.
It's very interesting. So much of your poems are so passionate about having both an American and a Palestinian identity, making baklava and blueberry pie for your family. You seem so proud of having that dual identity, but at first you weren't really accepted and it didn't come easily. How did you grow into that dual identity, and when did you become proud of it?
That's a great question. And I think it's a kind of question a lot of immigrants grapple with and also would love to answer. I think for a long time, I felt it was sort of a liability that I had two cultures and I had two languages. It was not a source of strength for me. Not that I ever wanted to hide it. I was always proud of being Palestinian, of being Arab. But as I grew older, I really began to understand that this background I had and these perspectives that were honed over the years were such assets, really, in how I look at the world now and how I've looked at the world from, the last decades. This has given me such a broad and profound way of looking at people who are marginalized in society. I really attribute this awakening for me and this understanding to having come from two cultures and two languages. I wanted to be working in the field of, where I can actually bring my two pieces of identity and of knowledge. And in fact, that's kind of what I did for my whole professional life. I worked for 27 years at Georgetown University at the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. And the whole premise behind this place, I mean, not the only premise, but one of the huge premises behind this place is to bring an understanding of the Arab world and of Islam to American society. And I worked for many of those years as a director of outreach, which meant that I would reach out to K through 12 teachers in the DC metropolitan areas.
And do you feel, in your work, especially with youth, do you feel like understanding is improving? Do you feel optimistic? Or do you feel like, oh my goodness, there's still so much work to be done?
I do feel optimistic, and I think we are in a very different place now than we were, 10 years ago even, or, after 9/11. I mean, I was working at Georgetown at that time, and I can't tell you how many teachers and community organizations would come to me and ask for information about Islam, about Arabs, but I think we're a little bit, hopefully, forward from that. I think we've made some strides, but I mean, I can't help but look at where we are now in terms of Gaza and Palestine. And on the one hand, it's amazing to me how there's a whole youth movement who wants who wants to champion Palestinian rights, who are really so upset about what's going on and about the genocide.
People just haven't learned. I mean, your parents experienced al Nakba. Are you ever shocked that people just still don't get it? It's the Palestinians go through a continued diaspora.
Leah, I can't tell you how many times I've thought that I'm really glad that my parents are not alive right now. If they saw what was happening in Palestine and in Gaza right now, I don't think they could take it. It's just a recurring, it's a recurrence of what they experienced, and it's actually worse. It's worse than what they experienced. And I mean, it does surprise me that the world is allowing this to happen. And it's allowing this to happen in Sudan and in Congo.
And you talk about your parents would just be obviously appalled by what's happening now. Um, can you talk about how what happened to them continued to affect them maybe later in life?
My mother lived until she was 95, bless her heart. And during the last few years, she had dementia. And what was very, very sad is she started having these hallucinations at that age that someone was taking over her house. And really that's why I have a poem about her, and in it says, the line is, "Some things never leave you." And it's really referring to that. Some things, some of your experiences, some of the things you felt earlier in your life, they often come back to you. They could haunt you. They can, depending on what they are. So somehow that dispossession, that loss, that intense loss, stayed with her and manifested in her last couple of years of life. It was so sad. Her memories are like henna on a hand, splendid arabesques fading each day until gone. She has covered so many miles by boat, plane, car, on foot, measured by oceans and clouds, gas fumes, tattered flags left behind, driver's licenses, rental agreements, goodbyes to friends and family, a lifetime unanchored, cleaved. She continues to worry that someone is plotting to take away her home while slowly hunching over a downswept, bent flower weighed down by hallucinations. She knows some things never leave you, so you have to leave them yourself. Takes small steps away, looking for some peace.
That must have been horrible to watch your mother go through that. I'm sorry. I was wondering, do you have any family in Palestine now?
I do, in Nazareth, actually, and in Haifa, and some cousins in Jaffa. So they're all what's now considered Israel. So they're all inside Israel, the state of Israel. I've been volunteering since 2016 for a program called We Are Not Numbers. And it's basically young people from Gaza who are learning to write well, learning to express themselves in stories and essays. And so they are paired with a writer or an editor here in the States or in Europe who serves as a mentor for them. And so even though these young people are not my relatives, they've become my friends. There are two or three of them with whom I've been in touch quite frequently, and one of them is actually living in northern Gaza, and he's in the famine, and he and his family are starving. And he sends me voice messages every week or two and just gives me an update on what's going on. And I feel like he's my son, he's actually even younger than my son, but I'm so grateful that he wants to tell me what's going on. And he's almost like not confiding in me, but he tells me, this is how I'm feeling, and I haven't really been telling anybody else how I'm feeling, and he tells me all these things. And it's heartbreaking to get his messages because I feel so like, my hands are, what can I do? I can't do anything for him. So I just write, send voice messages back to him and try to just be a little uplifting if possible. But more importantly, I talk about him. I talk about Ahmed. I've written poems about him. In this world, there's so much to apologize for. Today, I said I'm sorry to the hibiscus I couldn't resuscitate. Please forgive me for not taking good care of you, for not giving you enough sunlight. Somewhere there's a polar bear mother and her cub floating on a piece of ice, their home melting away in too much sun. I want to apologize to them too, to rescue mama and baby. Then I think of all the endangered polar bears and shrinking glaciers and remember we are destroying our planet. Our hearts have become so hard. We bomb and starve people on purpose. I want to say I'm sorry to the people of Gaza. I hold my sorrow deep inside. Gibran wrote, "Half of what I say is meaningless, and that's how I feel about my words of contrition, even if the other half might reach them. But I don't expect people in the middle of a genocide to listen to my words. Their bellies are empty, and they're crushed in bombed-out homes every day. I want to ask for forgiveness each time I drink a glass of water or enjoy a meal. My young friend in Gaza City writes that he eats one meal of rice each day. I apologize to Ahmad and his family in my mind. I want to hold them in a sheltering cloud high above all the bombing and destruction."
It just struck me as interesting. You say you're personally sorry, but it's not your fault. I would have thought you would have come from a place of anger. Why apologize?
I think I and many other Palestinians feel like we're just not doing enough. And we know that there's a lot we can't do. And we're doing so much. Everybody's on the Hill every day. Everybody's writing to their Congress people. Everybody is reading here and there. Everybody's writing op-eds. We're all, people are camping outside of Secretary Blinken's house. And every single morning being there, they're in tents outside his house. And I know these are all my friends, and there's a whole encampment in front of the Israeli embassy. I know, that it's not my fault, but here I am living in the United States, and my tax dollars are going to fund Israel's military actions. It is such a cognitive dissonance that I feel, and many of us feel. And I do feel sorry for that. I apologize for that.
It must have been hard when the war started to keep in touch and get them submitting poems and keep the process going. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, actually, for a long time, we didn't hear from many of them. They were just either fleeing from their homes, or they didn't have internet, or, we didn't. There was a long time when we're not able to publish very much. And these are poems, but also it's mostly essays about what's going on that they write. But slowly now they've been coming back, and their stories are so heartbreaking. Israel has bombed Gaza intermittently for a long, long time. Before this war, there were 5 others, but they were, relatively speaking, short-lived. So there are always heartbreaking stories coming out of Gaza about people losing, friends or family members, or having to flee, or having their home bombed, or whatever. But we also had a lot of other stories. We had stories about fishermen and the sea. We had stories about dances, and we had stories about, music concerts and graduations from college. But now it's mostly about the war. It's mostly about having to flee your home many times. We're not talking one time. We're talking many times. I can complain and say, I'm really upset, and but I have no reason to complain about anything. These young people are just going through hell right now. Many of them are going through hell right now. This is a poem, "Write My Name" is the title. It has an epigraph, which is a sentence in the beginning that gives a little bit of context for the poem itself. The epigraph comes from CNN. It says, "Some parents in Gaza have resorted to writing their children's names on their legs to help identify them. should either they or the children be killed. Write my name. Write my name on my leg, Mama. Use the black permanent marker with the ink that doesn't bleed if it gets wet, the one that doesn't melt if it's exposed to heat. Write my name on my leg, Mama. Make the lines thick and clear, and add your special flourishes so I can take comfort in seeing my mama's handwriting when I go to sleep. Write my name on my leg, Mama, and on the legs of my sisters and brothers. This way we will belong together. This way we will be known as your children.
Is there anything that you, going back to the conflict, would say to any of the leaders on either side or any of the people involved about this?
I don't know. It's a hard question. I mean, I am, I'm a poet. I live in that space of feelings. I'm not a politician. I just want people to see each other's humanity. But, we all have human rights. And, Israelis have human rights, of course, too. I'm not just talking about Palestinians. I'm talking about everyone.
And what gives you hope moving forward?
As I mentioned earlier, I think the younger generation now is really giving me hope. They grew up experiencing the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and I think that has been a real important for their development in terms of looking at rights, civil rights and human rights, reproductive rights, all rights. And so I think they're applying those same values on what's happening now in Palestine. So that gives me a lot of hope.
I'm host and producer Leah Small. Virginia Voices is a project of the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism at WHRO. Executive producers are Christopher Tyree and Lewis Hansen. The podcast is edited by Chris and myself. Virginia Voices is made possible through a grant by Virginia Humanities and donors like you. You can read the story and see photos from today's show and past episodes on our website, vcij.org, which is linked in our bio. We hope that if you like these conversations, you'll subscribe to Virginia Voices, where we'll continue to share the stories of Virginia citizens whose lives are impacted by the news of the day. On behalf of everyone here at the Virginia Center for Investigative Journalism, thank you for your time and support.